So here we are on a Monday afternoon after a refreshing sports-laden weekend. Did you watch the game, Pat?
I did, definitely, yeah. It was a very good game. Jude, we've had two great All-Irelands, and I'm not the biggest GA fan in the world. The hurling final was absolutely brilliant, but yesterday was a great game.
It was a good game. Good, a lot of skill, very, very tight. I think the lead exchanged something like 8 or 9 times.
Yeah, and like the Galway guy, what do you call him, Walsh, scored, 9 points and still was on the losing side. Imagine scoring 9.
Yes. I felt sorry for Galway. I just had a feeling in my guts, Kerry have that winner mentality. They just have
and the other thing as well, Jude, even though Galway come out and always got ahead, they never got away from Kerry. And you knew when Kerry got into the right groove, they would move ahead, and they did.
Amazing. Amazing. I wonder what it is. There must be something in the water down a bit there.
What is it, 36 or 37 All-Ireland titles now?
38. 30. No, 38. They had 30. I think there's 38 before that.
I think you're right. I remember last
39 now.
Roll on 38. I think that's what they said.
My God.
We in Donegal have got 2.
Tyrone had none, and then I think they've got 4 now, but all of those have been inside the last 20 years.
3 of them were Mickey Hertz, and 1 of them are Brian Dooher, and the other guy whose name escapes me at the minute.
That's right. Okay, let's settle to the affairs of the nation. And we start with this announcement the Sdlp's column Eastwood has made that they are going to sit in Stormont as the official opposition. And this has attracted quite a bit of coverage in the papers. Does it seem to you a significant move, or just?
Someone they say in the media, you should never hold your hands up and plead ignorance. But I've got to hold my hands up and plead ignorance in this one. If you haven't got a government, how can you have an opposition? So,
I have to say the same thought crossed my own mind. What's the big deal if there's no?
And how does it work technically? Now, I'm sure there's a wee small print about the speaker and all this somewhere. But Jude, I was listening to several people, and I thought it occurred to me, like, if you don't have an administration up and running, how can you have an opposition? And what's the point? Until such time, unless he's putting down some marker that when it's up and running, they will be the opposition. But Jude, I have to own up, Jude, it means nothing to me.
I think, now maybe this is cynical of me, but I think it has to do with making themselves visible to the media. The fact is that the Sdlp didn't win enough votes to have a minister.
8% or something, isn't it?
Aye. So they didn't qualify for having a minister in the executive if there was an executive forum. And I note where a column Eastwood says, ministers and politicians taking home full salaries cannot be allowed to hide or fail to account for the decisions, etc. He says ministers first and politicians, but I mean, ministers are politicians. What he's really trying to do, of course, is to get at the DUP and I guess Sinn Féin as well for drawing their salaries. But he's managing to dodge the fact that I would assume that the man he's appointing to leader of the opposition for the Sdlp, Matthew O'Toole, is also drawing his salary.
Yeah. Well, Matthew O'Toole's a very able fellow. I've heard him on many occasions. But Jude, something, isn't it the meetings tomorrow? And here's the thing. Amanda Ferguson had a thing on social media last week. I read, I think, one of the guys put it up on social media where she said one of the things that was absolutely under the radar, no matter what anyone says, this issue of Sir Geoffrey coming in as Deputy First Minister rankles big time in unionist circles. Now, I presume what's going on maybe going on in the DUP circles is they're saying they came into the last election week on this protocol thing. So maybe they're holding out until October and go for new elections and saying, look, we played hardball, we're the new hardball, and all you unionist people come for us, and we'll be top dogs again, and we will be First Minister again. Now, Jude, I presume that could be the strategy. In other words, they went in week to the last election. They're now maybe saying, look, see us, we have held back on setting up a new administration in Stormont. There's no deputy first minister, and we have proved our point. The British government is dancing to our tune with the protocol and putting the legislation through Westminster. So vote for us.
Yeah, it could be all right. Yeah, you're arguing a very convincing case there. Come back just to Matthew O'Toole. Like you, I'm quite impressed by him. I think he's a very effective speaker. But I tell you, there's something about him. and it is that he never comes across to me as affable. He's not what you call an affable figure, not to me anyway. And I keep thinking of Mark Durkan when I hear him speak. Now, Mark Durkan was a really, really good speaker. I mean, he could rattle through whatever it was that was in his head, and he was across a lot of the topics that he talked about, and he was quite clever. He had some really good sound bites. And yet, somehow when Mark was finished talking, what he'd said didn't cut through, to voters, or certainly didn't cut through to me. And I think there's something of Matthew O'Toole something of Mark Durkan in Matthew O'Toole as well. You can't deny that he's a very good speaker. You can't deny that he makes sense and is obviously a smart guy. But there's something missing. It's not coming through.
I knew Mark Durkan very well because he was John Hume's chief of staff for years. Yeah. Mark's actually a genuinely nice fella, but there's a certain truth in what you say. Mark was across the detail like you have never seen. He was brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But no way human that natural ability to communicate with people.
Yeah.
Mark, there's no that term chef de cabinet. The guy, the background guy that does all the research, knows as across all the detail. John, say this. Mark was perfectly that. Mark could go. I remember Mark came down one time and we went all to a meeting, and he was the finance minister. And you talk about, hey, but I left the room, and 2 months later, I didn't know what the hell he had said. It went straight over my head. So what you're saying about Matthew O'Toole, very similar. Now, Matthew O'Toole, didn't he work in Downing Street as a press officer or something?
He did, I'll tell you.
So he knows the way around politics. But you're right. But I've heard him now a couple of times in talkback, and he seems affable enough. Now, I don't know him, so I'm not in any position to make a major judgment on him. But I take your point. Sometimes it crosses very dry and academic, if you know what I mean.
Well, I suppose I'm back to my old thing about appearance. I'm thinking I tend to hear him on TV or see him on TV. Yeah. And he's there's a line in Julius Caesar where the guy says, "Yon Cassius hath a lean and hungry look." And I sometimes think of that when I see Matthew. He's there's not much flesh on him, big bone guy. And he always looks very stern. I can't think, maybe he smiles, but I can't remember seeing him smile. So it's that warmth that I miss in him. But
back to your main point, I'll swing it back on you. Do you see any point? Like, what's the end objective of the Sdlp here?
Well, I think it's the same reason as Guinness advertise their pints. It's not that people don't know it, but they want to remind people that they're still around. And I suspect that Colm Eastwood is wanting to do the same thing. And somehow, see that quotation I read, ministers and politicians taking home full salaries cannot be allowed to hide or fail to account for their decisions, while families and businesses across the North struggle to make ends meet. Now, all of that's true, except that all of the Sdlp, to the best of my knowledge, including Matthew O'Toole, are taking their salaries as well. So if he had announced, we're going to go into opposition, and as from next week, we're going to not take any salary, he had to put people on the spot then, all right. But I just think it's a little move to keep themselves in the headlines, so to speak, to make noises about salaries being paid to people who aren't working. Yeah. And somehow maybe to dodge the fact that they themselves are collecting salaries. I'm very cynical, Pat. You know me.
I can't see it. Like when I read it this morning, I thought, what? You're going into an opposition where there isn't a government. That's, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. The phrase that came to mind when I was thinking about Mark Durkan and Matthew O'Toole was the notion that, when somebody in a movie fires a blank gun and it goes off with a really flash and noise and so on, sounds absolutely like a real thing, but it doesn't impact on anybody. There's nothing. So maybe that's what I'm accusing him of. Anyway, that's the Sdlp making its presence felt. Dover lineup of lorries. Boy, oh boy. I'll never complain again about being stuck in traffic.
Yeah.
Jesus.
17
miles?
I wrote his name down. Andrew Dyer Smith was stuck for 21 hours on a queue. 21 hours. In fact, they had to get volunteers. on, I think it was Saturday, to walk around with water and food because people
That's
were.
right. That's right. Did that guy you mentioned, Pat, was that guy you mentioned an ordinary guy in a car going on his holidays?
An ordinary guy in a car. He was quoted in the Guardian, I think on Saturday. I wrote his name down. But Jude, they had one of the things the British government. I'm getting on ahead of you here. The British government accused the French of not playing ball. That only 4 of the 9 booths that were open. Do you know why only 4 of the 9 booths were open? The French guys at Kent couldn't get through the traffic to get to the booths because they were stuck in traffic themselves.
Well, it was foretold. I remember in the early days, maybe it was just after the Brexit vote. I remember politicians and various people saying, this is going to leave the Kent, half of Kent is going to be a lorry car park. There was warnings about backup of queues and so on. And lo and behold, it has come to pass. This is Brexit. And the efforts to try to shift it onto the French just strike me as
the guy, I think he's called Richard Calder. I think it's Richard. He's called Calder. And he's a travel expert. He's easily the best I've ever seen on any of the media. He works for the Independent and he's always on TV. And he said yesterday, we can't blame the French. This is what we wanted. He says, I'm not making he says, Brexit is totally legitimate and that's what people want. But he said, we wanted to be a third country. So he says, if we're a third country going to Europe, they are going to check our passports. They're going to get everybody out and so on. So he says, this is what we voted for. And he says, what took a couple of minutes now is going to take 3 times, 4 times longer. So he said, every car coming up to the checkpoint will be checked because we are now. And he says, this is what we voted for. And I think his name was Clement Bouon, who's the French Interior Minister or something, or Transport Minister, whatever. He's one of them. He said, he says, the British to blame us for Brexit. It's not our problem. It's their problem.
Well, you see, the British, that's the one thing that the British find it very hard to deal with. The fact that, it's pointed out that certain inconveniences like 21 hours and they're stuck in a car is not the fault of somebody else. It's actually something they cooked up themselves. It's all part of the oven-ready deal.
Jude, 62.2% of the people of Dover voted for this. They wanted freedom of movement. Well, they've got it. And what was the other one? John Redwood was saying, if the French don't want to go somewhere else, where can you go? 72,000 cars went through Dover, apparently, I think on Saturday. Because, the Brits always head to France and Spain in the summer.
Yes.
Like the kids are now in summer holidays. So suddenly the reality of Brexit is hitting so many people. And the whole thing about Brexit is an absolute disaster.
Do you not think, Pat, that every one of the people on those cars waiting for up to 21 hours, let's say they didn't all, but let's say most of them had to wait for 10 hours, say, let's say 10, let's be really modest. Do you not think those people will be fuming and will be saying, I voted for Brexit, but I could cut my hand off now, Will they see through the efforts of some of the Brexiteers, politicians, to pass the blame on to the French? Or will they gladly seize on the French as being scapegoats?
Oh, no, I think that there's this sort of entitlement, Jude, that they will blame the French and they'll blame everybody else, not themselves. The reality is Brexit. And when you vote to be a third country, you got to expect. Jude, if I leave a club because I don't like the rules and regulations, I can hardly go back and the following day and say, oh, by the way, I want to come and go as I please here, and don't you do anything about it? Dude, it's an old are having rules. If you guys, without being members, can do anything you want, so that's the way it is.
Hi, we were telling them this 4 years ago, Pat. At least 3 years ago.
Absolutely.
They weren't listening to us. If they had, there would have far less lorries lined up. Anyway, could I sneak in a wee item here? About rejection therapy. It's just a piece I read. I don't know if you saw it, did you?
Are you talking about BBC and yourself or something?
Never mind. It isn't confined to the BBC. I've been rejected by better people than the BBC.
Anyway, go ahead.
Well, it's this guy has this rejection therapy. He says what people have to do, people who feel insecure, like none of us likes to be rejected. You put yourself forward and you say to somebody, I love you, and they say, get lost. You don't like that feeling. So this guy's cure for this is to get people to put themselves into situations where they will be rejected. And as a result, you develop a kind of a thicker skin to it. So he had people, the instance that's cited is this Japanese guy, I think, who walks up to a stranger in a hotel lobby and asks him for $100. And the guy looks at him and says, no. And the guy says, oh, thank you. Okay. And walks away. And then every day under this rejection therapy, you're to do this. The reason that guy was in that situation was when he was at school, the teacher had a system where the kids would all compliment each other, compliment somebody in the room. And everybody got a compliment except this kid. And as a result, he really felt rejected and insecure and, you know, afraid of failure. But apparently they've now developed, this Canadian entrepreneur has developed, called Jason Cumley, has developed an app whereby you can organize things and get a rejection, one rejection at least every day, like asking somebody for a free lift or asking somebody for a discount when you buy stuff. What do you think, Pat? Is it nuts or is it?
Dude, I don't know. I don't have any doubts about that. You know, okay, I know what the theory is, that if you build up resistance, you know, and so on. But say, right here, let's do a hypothetical. Say I walk up and say, Jude, go and give me 100 quid, and you say F off, you know, and I've been using nice words here, you know, the full word. And then I go somewhere else and I see some young girl and say, hey, go and give me a kiss, and she slaps me across the face. And I go ask somebody for a lift over to the continent, and he says, look, are you insane? Hey, do I go in the corner? You know, like rejection can be, no, if somebody's young and sensitive or something. No, Jude, I'm being ridiculous here, but I'm not so sure it's such a great idea. I think your man's theory is if you build up resistance to rejection, and I presume there's another positive in here. He thinks a lot of people, if you go and ask them, they might actually say, come on, all right, I'll give you a helping hand. And maybe the fear of rejection disappears. But Jude, here's a quick one. I knew this old guy, he was a teacher, I think, in St. Columb's College. I can't remember his name. I think it was Joe something. I met him down Templemore Sports Complex in Derry. And one day we got into this discussion, and he said he believed in selection, you know, the 11 plus and all the rest of it. And I says, why? He says, look, Pat, it's simple. He says, see in this life, he says, see, I see a beautiful girl when I was at 12 or 13 or 14 over there. And I said, I might love to get out with her, or go out with her, and I go over and say, hey, Mary, can I? And she says, bugger off, I don't fancy you at all. He says, that's reality. He says, it's happened to me, it's happened to you, and it's happened to everything. And he says, the second thing, he says, say I want to be a doctor. And he says, I go along and I fail maths and I fail physics and all. The reality is, he says, I'm getting rejected. So he says, you know, and he says, whereas I'm teaching, I think he was teaching French and English and history or something like that. I can't remember what he was teaching. Really, genuinely don't remember. But he says life is about rejection and about selection. So he says, get used to it.
Well, I see sense in that, some sense in it. But think back in your own school days, Pat, when you're in a situation where you could be rejected or the opposite. Like teachers, by and large, in my experience at school, the key word was, that's not good enough. Rather than, that's not great, but, you know, you're trying, you're getting a bit better. So encouragement, in my experience, always helps people more than rejection or criticism. If somebody criticizes me, I don't think well of them. I think ill of them. And it doesn't help me to get better at whatever it is they're talking about. But if somebody pats me in the back and says, God, that's really good. Jeez, I feel so good. I want to do it again. So
Jude, there's four. I remember from one of the few things I learned during my years as a manager. Apparently, there's four things in life. The least effective motivation is public criticism. Then 3 is private criticism. Number 2 is private praise. But the best motivator of all is public praise.
Why?
1 to 4.
That's good. Where did you get that one, Pat?
Some business thing years ago. I remember reading it somewhere.
Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense. Because if you stop to think about it, if you're even mentioned in a neutral way in a public place, like if somebody's making a speech and he says, oh, I see Pat McArthur's with us tonight. Hello, Pat. Even just to mention your presence, oh, geez, you feel good. You know.
I know.
You realize I'm alive.
But you'd say years ago, and you're at St. Columb's, somebody had walked past, say one of the teachers, Collins, that was a really good article that you wrote, and I thought it was superb. That's great. But see, a couple of days later, You read in the Derry Journal, Mr. Such and Such yesterday claimed one of his students, Jude Collins, had produced an absolutely superb. And people passing the street, your friends going, geez, Jude, that was brilliant. Wouldn't you love it?
That's right. Actually, that happened. I don't know if you remember a guy, he was a member of the Sdlp. He was a councillor from Omagh. No, he wasn't from Omagh, Ballygolly, I think he was from, actually, but he sat in the council in Omagh called Seamus Shields. He was a primary school principal about Ballygolly or somewhere like that. And he believed that people, if they were supported, would make more progress than if they were critical. And his whole demeanor, he was famous for it, his whole demeanor oozed this approachability. And anything you said to him, he would find ways of, saying, that's not bad. And I remember doing a review of the local papers one time, and he featured in it the date of his retirement, I think, from the school.
Yeah.
Now, he had very bad health. He had all sorts of things. He had a bypass, he'd had pneumonia, so on. And I listened to these things and I said, what he did the day he retired as a teacher, he started training as a solicitor at the age of 65 with all these medical problems. And I remember I said, I knew this man, my God, he's really shown the rest of us up. And he contacted me and he said, oh, my friends are coming up to me and saying that they heard about me on the radio. So there's your amplification once again. You know, something that was clearly a lot of people would have known about, but once you put it on the radio, whoa, big time. Public praise.
I knew a guy once, and he went across the dance floor and he asked to get to dance, and she said no. That affected him awfully for a long time. By the way, I wouldn't have the balls to do what he done, because I certainly wouldn't have done it. But I remember at the time, because it was public humiliation. Because it was a time that, what do you call it, people didn't. Now, I don't know what the motivation, maybe there was some personal animosity between them or whatever, I don't know. But Jude, this guy saying about, like for him, it was a really bad thing that everybody else in the school got a compliment, bar him. Now, Jude, that would absolutely destroy you when you're 10 or 11 years of age, wouldn't it?
And you wouldn't forget it either,
Not at all.
That's the kind of thing you do,
would shape you for life.
I remember, I'll tell you, when I think of the few subjects I was reasonably good at, I was very bad at a lot of them, but the few subjects I was reasonably good at, in all cases, were guys who were positive in their response to me, who encouraged me. I mean, when will people get that message? It seems to me there's a case to be made, but I think it's barking up the wrong tree in the first place. You could toughen people a wee bit, but maybe it'd be better just building them up a bit first. Okay, let's move on to other more general things, like President Trump, because once a president, always a president. President Trump looks like he's on the slide. Yeah,
Jude, the congressional hearings, I think, finished on Friday. But the thing that amazes me that totally, Jude, the evidence being produced almost on a daily basis of insurrection, bordering on treason, outright lies, supporting violence, supporting thuggery, that he sat for 3 hours and watched them and loved it on TV, made no effort to call in the National Guard, made no effort to call on anybody, kept going about the big steal that he knows a lie about the election being stolen, and he's still hugely popular. And it looks like, you sort of ask yourself, this is the most powerful country in the world, and yet the democracy was under threat. And a lot of people seem to have no problem with it. And the question that I keep asking, what is American democracy as sound as we thought it was? Or see, the next time, Jude, if the Democrats don't like the election results, could they take it a stage further?
Well, I think you're right. I think it comes back to this notion of bearing arms. The right to bear arms. So why do they have this right? It's because they never really... the idea was that you would be protected from the government. That the government might prove a tyrant, and if the citizens had arms, then they could, of course, protect themselves from oppression by the government. I think, now that goes back hundreds of years, but I have a feeling that that's part of it, that way of thinking of suspicion of the government, which has been boosted and channeled by Trump and others to the point where well, maybe they're not split anymore 50-50, but they're near enough to it. So you could say then that Trump may not be, I was going to say alive, but not as politically alive as he was. But there's plenty of others waiting to step into his shoes. This guy, Ron DeSantis, who is from Florida also, apparently is more popular in Florida, even though Trump himself lives in Florida. So although Donald Trump may have gone away, the spirit of Donald Trump lives on.
But here's a question for you. Like, it's not a question anymore that Trump is innocent. Everybody knows he's guilty. It's not up for debate anymore. Like, everybody knows what he did, that he knew what he did was illegal, that he's fomented all this trouble.
Back for that question of illegal. See, they wouldn't see that as illegal, or if it was illegal, it was the rising up of the good people. He
told people to come and gather, that he would join them. They climbed over barricades and went into the very houses of Parliament. There's 6 or 7 people dead directly as a result. Others died afterwards. They have built gallows where now, Jude, had they found Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence, there's a fair chance one of them actually would have been executed there and then. Now, how would that have played out?
It's sort of scary to think. At the back of my mind, though, there is the awkward fact for that interpretation of events that, in fact, while some of them had weapons, most of them hadn't. Most of them hadn't. So if you're going to have an insurrection, you've got to get something closer to an army. As Martin McGuinness said, it takes an army to fight an army. The guys that went into the Congress were not an army.
Hold on a minute, Jude. Say tomorrow morning that Stormont was back up and running. And we'll use, say, the loyalists, the UDA, come in en masse and go over the place and wreck the place. And people have to, the other people have to be taken out side doors with protection and all the rest. Could we say that, by the way, forget about it, it was no big deal?
No, I wouldn't say forget about it. But I would say that you would need to keep it in proportion. I would say that there's a hard core of people who are, absolutely sort of thugs and would wreak as much damage as possible. But I wouldn't see it as being an armed resistance force that's going to overthrow the state. That'd be the distinction I'd make.
But would you not see it as a serious insurrection?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's serious, but I don't know about insurrection. I think a display of thuggery and disrespect and all the things that symbolic more than anything else, really. Symbolic of something wrong about the society, something certainly wrong about the Republican Party.
I could dismiss this. You're trying to be logical. Dude, this guy got a serious amount of votes in the last election. I met an old guy walking at beach up in Killybegs, and he'd worked for, I didn't realize this, he had worked for Jimmy Carter. And he had worked in the White House. He is some sort of professor guy. This is some years ago. And I remember him very clearly telling me, though, he says, I was prepared to accept there might have been 15 to 20% bigots in America. He says, what I was not prepared to acknowledge was the fact that there could be 45%. He says, we have a major, major problem in our country.
Yeah. I think Trump would be to blame for that. Trump sort of legitimized being liar and racist and all sorts of stuff. So people look and says, oh, well, if he says, then that nastiness within him, and maybe within all of us, is given free rein and comes bouncing out. And there was a similar problem with Boris, of course. Boris was into a post-truth era as well. And, still people are admiring Boris. Still people are saying Boris should be in the cabinet. Still, people are saying Boris will come back.
Did you see the last day? I don't think we discussed it the last day when Boris, that whole thing, all the 4 candidates at the time, all of them were asked, would they have Boris in their cabinet?
Yeah.
Not one hand went up.
Yeah, well, I think the reality is rather different. James cleverly said, if Liz Truss brought Boris into her cabinet, he would have not had any problems with that. And none of them said anything. They asked, put your hand up, and none of them put their hand up, but nobody said, what an outrageous idea. No, not one of them.
But where are we going, as globally even? if the truth doesn't matter anymore, that if facts don't matter anymore, if you can lie your way to power and that's grand, and there's no accountability or transparency, what then?
I think there probably always was lies, but I think it's just more blatant now. Pat, I want to get us something sort of half serious and half, because we're only about 2 minutes left, 3 minutes left. And that is the question of the weather. You know, the way when we come on, I usually ask you, what's the weather like up in Donegal? It's now becoming a really serious matter. As you pointed out, we've never had a summer like this before, where you have a couple of days of decent weather, and that's the size of it, really, or over warm weather. And then these deluges, Derry was swamped together.
Yeah, Jude, last Monday we had on this island, I think it was somewhere down south somewhere, 31 or 30%, 30 degrees, sorry. By the way, Jude, the warmest day ever recorded in Ireland, I think, was in Castlederg, 33.1% or something, about 20, 30 years ago. Anyway, it doesn't matter. But anyway, right, last Monday, we had the warmest day of this year so far. I was out on Tuesday. It was cold. I was at a wedding in Donegal up in Balbuffet on Saturday. Came home and I looked up social media and says there's been massive flooding in Derry. The Strand Road area, the Foyle Road area, absolute flood. Wheelie bins floating down the street. And then on yesterday morning, Sunday morning, I saw images of bridges and roads being washed away in Inishowen, which is basically on a par with geographically with Derry, and so on. And so I'm going, wait a minute. So we had the warmest day of the year on Monday, cold on Tuesday. We have absolute deluge flooding on Saturdays, and yesterday was pretty much the same. And Jude, I looked out today. It's been raining, overcast, grey here. I don't know what it's like with you.
Yes.
And I counted up. I figure we've had, this is coming towards the end of July, and if we had 10 days of sunshine this summer, and by the way, that's probably been very conservative. That's about it. I don't ever remember a summer like this.
Okay, let me be controversial in the last minute that we're in. You could argue that we have a fixation on the weather. Like, it's every day on TV, on the radio, after the news, you'll have a detailed account of, cloud cover and a front of low pressure and so on.
Yeah.
It's only weather, raining or not. So that's the first thing I'd say. I think we have a bit of, and I ask you, hello, Pat, what's the weather like in Donegal? So maybe we're a wee bit fixated on it. And the second thing is, we're worried about it now because it's coming to us. Yeah. For years, people in Asia and in Africa and God knows where, they were suffering from climate crisis. But it's only when it comes to our own door that we get worried. Aren't we a selfish shower?
Yeah, but Dr. Collins, weather does affect your mood. See, when you get up in the morning, the sun's shining and it's lovely. You're thinking, great, I'm going to go somewhere. And you get up and it's grey and it's dull. And you go, Jesus.
All right. We'll have to arrange for artificial sunlight to come into both our homes. Okay, Pat. Okay.
All the best.
Thanks.
Good luck.
Bye.
Bye.